Well, this has been a long time coming. The Digimon card game first migrated to the West, officially in January of 2021. 2 weeks prior, Japan had just released its fourth set, Great Legends. Unfortunately, this meant it was time to catch us up with Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5, two sets that would combine the first three sets into two separate releases. And while the first couple of sets would be a huge hit to players, ultimately it became a short-term feeding frenzy as boxes would suddenly skyrocket from the $70 MSRP to $150 a box. For Digimon players who migrated to One Piece, do you get a sense of deja vu? While Japan would release BT4 on the 18th of December 2020, Western audiences would not see this set until a full 5 months later after our initial release of Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5. Granted, 1.5 did release March of 2021 2 months later. But with COVID, shipping delays, and whatnot, the attempt to put Western audiences on a simultaneous release ultimately never happened. And thus, the gap continued growing even larger. Fast forward to BT15 and we saw firsthand the mistakes made in not unifying all regions with a simultaneous release. And as much as Bandai tried, there was no fixing it. Ultimately, the Japanese players suffered the most with the futile attempts of fixing Apocalypse, by not just one but multiple band-aid fixes on the restriction list. Until inevitably, here in the States upon release, Apocalypse would be limited to one. But of course there was backlash there as well. And now, with just a year's time left, the Digimon card game will be unified with a global release of BT21. But there's one last question I have for Bandai, and this not only affects players in the West, but players in the East. Should there be a unified format as well? Keep in mind, the Digimon card game in several regions is best of 3, commonly seen as BO3. But in Japan, it is a best of 1, again, commonly seen as BO1 if you're on the internet. Currently, One Piece players, another Bandai trading card game, play best of 1s regardless of region. And in that line of thought, should Digimon move to the best of 1 format, or should it move to a best of 3 format in Japan? This is where the real discussion begins for this video, as we look towards the future of the Digimon card game. The roadmap of course will look at the benefits of best of 1, best of 3, and a compromise as a middle ground. By the end of this video, do let me know your thoughts on the topic, and where you feel yourself leaning towards as a potential solution. This video's concept was mostly inspired by my previous discussion on deck ratios. For Japanese players, they tend to play mostly newer decks, while the West constantly innovates older ones. However, there's also the fact that because Japan is in a best of 3 format, does this change up their ratio substantially to go for the faster win? Again, in discussions with content creator East, security control is not that prevalent of a deck in their meta. But because they don't have full event results most of the time, it's also hard to give a quantitative answer. And because of these subtle changes in ratios, is it enough of a disadvantage for them to play in decks that feel more streamlined for a best of 1 format when they are suddenly placed in a situation such as Worlds where they would play a best of 3? After all, some decks are more high roll than others that if you can high roll 7 matches in a row, only to flop on the last match, that's honestly an amazing run. In my discussions with content creators East and Huang Zero who play Japan's format in regards to a best of 1, there was a general agreement that more games do allow you to find the better player. However, sometimes there are other factors that prevent you from doing so. In a situation where the game were to move to a best of 1 format, there is definitely going to be heavily mixed opinion. But the reason why Japan does the best of 1 format is simply because of time. Anecdotally, from East's perspective, most individuals work until 6 or 7 PM, and card shops close by 8 to 9 PM, meaning you have a 1 to 2 hour window of Digimon time before they close up shop. Considering Digimon has an even larger scene in Japan, I'm sure they could have a much better consistent turnout for their events, meaning longer nights to determine a winner. To put things further into perspective, a best of 3 in North America has 50-minute rounds. But a best of 1? You get half that time at 25 minutes. With a best of 1 format, ultimately you'd be condensing down a 9 to 10 hour event with 512 players into probably 5 or 6. And while from a logistics perspective this would mean decreased venue time and cheaper costs for staff, judges, and commentators, what ultimately is the problem? The ultimate flaw with the best of 1 format, in my opinion, is that the player base won't be happy about it. Mainly because there's no longer a way for you to adapt between games to find the weaknesses of your opponent's deck. But one other area of concern is that I feel it would decrease morale of the game. I feel with the way certain decks are designed, getting Ungud Bunga with no counterplay feels bad. Opening up a bad hand feels bad. But on the bright side, security control might not be as prevalent considering it's no longer a win game 1 and see if games 2 and 3 happen or not. Fun trivia here, security control in the BT5 format was the last time I played competitively. Truth be told, the experience of that tournament left me mildly sour about competitive play. It wasn't that I was losing, but winning off of a single game and it did not feel like my opponent could do anything about it as they slowly decked out. But in a best of 1 setting, security control does not matter as much. With a best of 3 format, players have the ability to learn about their opponent's deck with each game. You might see cards reeled off option cards, tamers, and see them get bottom decked. Oh, I saw you run HPD? Good, it got bottom decked. 1 text, text in general, start counting them. One definite advantage of best of 3 games is that as the game progresses, this gives players insight on potentially the entire deck lineup. In security control matchups, you may find yourself frequently asking to check their trash for those chaos degradations or long key out of stock dos before you attack the next security. But while yes, a best of 3 does contribute to determining the better player, this is where longer tournaments can cause fatigue for not just the player, but the staff as well. In offline tournaments, finding time for food in between rounds can be difficult, and of course the logistics of venue and additional equipment can be limiting. Generally, time is the only problem in my mind when it comes to a best of 3 format. But what about that last option that I mentioned? What is this compromise? The compromise ultimately would come with competitive play. Would a best of 1 Swiss transition to a best of 3 top cut be beneficial? Although this does test the consistency of your deck in the earliness of the competitive field, there is the advantage of mulligans to be your saving grace. Additionally, the compromise between the players, tournament staff, and one major point for tournament organizers, the time at the venue. There is no right or wrong answer to this video in any way, shape, or form. In my mind, having everyone play the same number of games for their matches would be ideal for a true comparison of players across the world. I am of the opinion that deck ratios are adjusted for a more aggro approach in the East, while in the West, because of best of 3, we have decks like security control. And even with the global release, it is likely that the 2 formats continue as they are with the best of 1 in one region, while the other continues with best of 3. But in your opinion, whether you're playing in the East or West, do you think the formats should be more aligned or proceed as they are? Or would you like a compromise approach as I mentioned, as the last option? Let me know your thoughts on this topic, because I have another one to go over this week. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.